Western philosophy, which affects the environment, we can start from the age of reason. That is the beginnings of scientific age in Europe. If you are familiar with the European history, the medieval period, which is now known as the Dark Ages, was the period when the church had enormous power. And the power was such that it superseded the power of the kings and of all the nobles and, of course, the common people. And they ruled and in a way that had become very tyrannical. People became scared of the church. A large number of people, for example, during that time, there was the witch hunt. And thousands of people were burnt as witches, thousands of people were persecuted. And there was a great fear of religion in the hearts of people. During that time, and when the church was very powerful, there were the emergence of scientific thinkers like Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, and Tycho Brahe, and many others who actually challenged the authority of the church, and they put forward their theories, which they said were based on evidence, based on observation. One very fundamental from the church point of view was that they were of the opinion that the earth is not at the center of the universe, that the earth is one among many other planets that is circling the sun. Now, this was something which the church thought went against the biblical teachings. So these people were persecuted. As we know, Copernicus and Galileo were persecuted, they were jailed, and were also, their ideas were never accepted. But this happened in the 16th century. But by the 18th century, we find that over 100, 200 years, people's minds are constantly changing. While they were in fear of the church during the medieval period from 12th, 13th to the 16th century, from the 17th century onwards, more and more people started thinking out of the box of religion. Hegel, who is one of the most prominent philosophers of the West, proposed that human societies evolve from the age of religion to age of philosophy and then to science. In other words, what he was trying to say was that the human intellect, the human power of reason is going to get more and more powerful, and it is going to take over power in the next coming generations. The similar kind of theories were given by a group of philosophers we know as the social evolutionist theories. The social evolutionist theories comprising of Comte, Montesquieu, Spencer, Tocqueville, and others, who more or less proposed that after the age of the church, age of religion, humans are going to go into a more speculative stage, a more enlightened stage of philosophy, where they will still be thinking, but they will be thinking out of the confines of religion. And finally, there would come an age where logic, reason would prevail, and that would be the age of science. Very great influence in the 18th and 19th century were put forward by philosophers such as Francis Bacon, René Descartes, and others, and especially Descartes, who proposed this division between mind and matter and a form of dualistic thinking, where there was a separation between the subject and the object. This dualistic thinking, the separation of mind and matter, formed the base of what we today know as Western scientific thinking. Basically, what it meant was that whatever was out there in the world, in the cosmos, in society, was something that could be seen as an object by the human mind. But human here came with a rider. And this is a very important part of the Western philosophical thinking, that while they were talking about the domination of reason, the domination of logical thinking, about personal liberation. What they meant by liberation was that the human individual was free to do whatever he wanted to do. They were not confined, and they were specifically talking in terms of the control by the church. That earlier it was what people had to do what the church told them to do, and people had to believe what the church told them. People had to go by everything that religion, as they believed, was dictating. They could not think independently. So here, liberation was from this confines of the clergy of the church over human thinking facilities. And science was seen as the hallmark of human achievement, the point where humans really become civilized. And with the emergence of what we understand as Western science, but we must also remember that Western science did not come just out of nowhere. Western science actually emerged out of earlier forms of thinking, earlier forms of experimentation, which in some cases were of magical nature, of what in those days was called as apothecaries, the healers. Then a large part of scientific methodology arose and was adopted into Europe from the Islamic civilization, which had attained very great heights during the medieval period. The medieval period in which Europe was being ruled by the church was actually the age of enlightenment in the Islamic civilization, where there was a lot of scientific achievements, real science achievements. But then the cycle came, and their scientific achievement was suppressed by their religion and their whatever, their society. But in the West, these things started moving outside. And along with this science, of course, with the scientific technology, industrial technology became possible. There was discovery of many things like the steam engine, and I did not summarize. I mean, we all know that many technologies were then discovered during this scientific period, that is in the 18th, 19th century, which made possible the emergence of the capitalist economy. An economy that broke through the earlier feudal order. A feudal order that was based on ascriptive statuses, where noblemen inherited land, and there was this scientific discoveries and the capitalist economy made possible the emergence of an entrepreneurial class of people who were achievers on their own merit, people who were intellectual scientists, who were voyagers, who went into different countries, the colonizers, the people who took courage and they went out into the world, both in search of knowledge. We cannot say that all the colonizers were only after resources. Many of them went to explore, to discover new places, discover new things, and along with it, of course, they started colonizing other countries. Now, the scientific methodology stressed objectivism, which came out of Descartes' theory of the separation of mind and matter. So since mind and matter could be separated, what it really means that you can look at something without being emotionally or sentimentally involved. In other words, objectivism means a separation. A separation which means that the scientist should not be involved as a moral, value-based human being, as an emotional human being in what he or she is studying. I will keep the she out, I will only use the he, and I will explain this later. So what he is studying. Rationality. Rationality was based on this objectivism. You can only be rational if you are objective. Rationality was opposed to emotions and instincts. If you are emotional, you cannot be rational. If you believe your instincts, which means that you are not being rational. Rational means you are evidence-based. You believe what you see. You believe what you can know. It was not rational, for example, to believe in a sacred which is not knowable. So if you are rational, you would like to believe in the knowable. There was faith in sensory evidence, there was faith in experimentation, and there was also the underlying scientific principle of only accepting things as far as they were known to be true. In other words, the day there was evidence to show that something was not true, then one had to discard it. In other words, science did not believe, like religion, in absolute truth. The difference between science and religion was seen in this. In religion, once you are told this is how it remains. It never changes. If the Bible told us that God created earth, the universe in so many days, that is how it remains. It doesn't change. But in science, things keep changing. And they keep changing because of experimentation. And also because you are not bound by emotions. Now, I have been using the word man all this through. Because while people like Descartes and Francis Bacon were talking about rationality, talking about reason, they equated it only with men. Men alone were seen as reasonable, as having logic, as having the capacity for logical thinking. And why women were not seen as having all that? Because while men were equated with civilization, with the capacity for civilization, with the capacity for developing intellect, having brains, having all this characters, women were seen like nature. They were equated with instinct and emotion. Women were seen as understanding things through their instinct, being very emotional, like mothers are emotional, women are emotional. They were seen as incapable of being objective. This was the reason women were seen as inferior. Because women could not be objective, and if one could not be objective, if one could not be unemotional, if one could not be non-sentimental, then one could not be a scientist. And because men could be like that, men could be scientists, and one major aim of Western science was the aim or goal of science was the conquest of nature. And because at that certain period of time, historically speaking, in the 18th and 19th century, European people were colonizing the world. Europe was seen as the apex of civilization. So the theory was the societies evolve from lower to higher stages, and the highest stage of human evolution was shown or was embodied in European civilization. They were at the top. They were the most logical, the most rational, the most liberated. They had the greatest capacity to create technology. They were at the top of industrial revolution, and with this technology and with the help of the industrial revolution, that they had guns, they had steamboats, they had ships that could sail very far into the seas, they had compass, they had telescopes. So with all this, they could conquer the world. And this was also taken as an objective truth. Now, what is objective? An objective truth is something that is evidence-based. So what was the evidence for the superiority of the white European men? The evidence was their capacity for technological superior inventions and their capacity for conquest. Because they were conquering others, they were superior. So it was like a self-evident truth. And how were they treating the people or the areas they were colonizing? When the Europeans went to New Zealand, New Zealand was dubbed as terra nullius. Terra nullius means empty country. And what were they calling an empty country? Empty country was a country that was already populated by thousands of people. The Maoris, the indigenous people of New Zealand. But to the white European men who considered themselves the only civilized people at that time on the globe, not the only civilized, but they were judging civilizations according to, how close they came to resemble the Europeans. Now, because in New Zealand they found people that did not resemble the Europeans in any way, in Australia, the Australian Aborigines, they thought they were not even human. They were dubbed as part of nature. So they came across a country full of unexploited nature, full of people who did not seem to be exploiting nature. See, to the Europeans, the mark of civilization were those people who were exploiting nature. People who lived in the forest and did not cut the trees. People who lived with animals and did not domesticate or kill them. They were considered as uncivilized. And also like those animals with whom they claimed kinship. As we know that many indigenous people believe that they are descended from animals. We have totemic religions which consider, and to the Europeans this seemed a evidence of their being not civilized. Because those people are equating themselves with the animals, they could not be like these Europeans, and then being a part of nature, they were not really human. They were like the animals they lived with. So there were two options, either to get rid of them, like dominating nature. So dominate those people, like you are cutting the trees, you cull the humans as well. And this exactly was actually done. With many indigenous people, they were mercilessly killed. They were gunned, they were poisoned, they were deliberately infected with certain diseases like measles and syphilis so that they all die out. And they did die out. During the periods of colonization, most native populations were almost completely decimated. In America, the entire North American plain was almost completely, tribe after tribe was killed almost to the last human being. And because they were equated with nature. So you have to dominate nature, you have to dominate and kill and conquer those people who to them appeared as nature and not as human. So, during this period of colonization, what the white men were trying to do, they were trying to impose civilization on rest of the world. That was defined in terms of the spread of industrial civilization, urbanization, and moving as much away from nature as possible. And also during that period, because they were equating women with nature, to a large extent, these indigenous people, the native people in the colonies, also appeared uncivilized to them, because many of them were matrilineal. In many of them, there was very little patriarchy. In many of them, women seemed to be having as much power as men. And they said, what kind of civilization is this? Because women cannot rule. Women don't have the capacity to rule. Women don't have the intellect. Women don't have the power of rationality. Women cannot create science. So how can women be equal to men? And if you think that women are equal to men, then you are not civilized. So civilization had also meant that patriarchal values were being propagated. So in the first period of colonization, in the first phase of this what you call as the European Renaissance, the age of reason, the age of enlightenment, it is all got very good names, because that was the first time when the Western people began to think independently, out of the church, out of religion. And they thought that that was the good thing, and it was good, because it did give rise to a lot of scientific and original ideas. Lot of truths did come out. For example, it was established that the earth revolves around the sun, that the earth is not at the center of the universe. But at the same time, because of the associated philosophy of white male domination, of association of or thinking about civilization as being domination of nature, a lot of environmental destruction took place. So post-colonial times, during more recent times, we have different forms of philosophies also coming from the West, which we call as preservationist. That is, they are a different kind of philosophy. Now they are no longer thinking of exploitation or destruction, but they are thinking of preservation. But this preservation is also got a very Western kind of a, you can say, bias. So you are thinking in terms of nature parks, you are thinking in terms of wildlife sanctuaries, because again, with this man and nature opposition, this tendency to think dialectically, dichotomously, which began from Descartes, that you can only have things opposed to each other. You cannot have things living together. So if we want to save nature, we have to remove man from it. So how do we have preservation of nature? Remove the forest dwellers from the forest. And this is something again which is not the right kind of a philosophy, because this opposition of humans to nature, I mean, opposition of some kind of humans to nature is of course very right, but not all humans to nature, not the natives, not the indigenous people. So modern development theory has been very strongly influenced by the Western philosophy, especially the eco-philosophy of the West, which has always opposed culture to nature, opposed man to woman, has opposed civilization to living with nature, being ecosystem people. Western eco-philosophy has always, from the time it emerged to the contemporary time when it is spreading around the world as neoliberalism, as neo-capitalism, continues to oppose civilization to nature, and the developmental models that follow this Western philosophy continue to be detrimental to survival of nature and consequently of human beings.